A quiet life can shatter in a single night. For Sarah Bennett, a widow living alone on the Dakota frontier, that night came with a storm that seemed intent on tearing the world apart. But it wasn't the wind or the thunder that changed everything. It was the crying, a sound that had no business being out there in the howling darkness. Sarah stood at the window of her small cabin, watching the sky boil. The year was 1878. Her husband Thomas had been gone 2 years, and the loneliness was a constant ache. The howling wind was the only company she had most nights. "Looks like a bad one, Rusty," she said to her old hound, who lay by the fire. He just whined, his eyes fixed on the door. She'd battened down the hatches, secured the livestock, and stacked enough firewood for a siege. The rain turned to hail, hammering the roof like angry fists. Thunder cracked so hard the cabin shook. And that's when she heard it, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a child crying. She froze, listened. There it was again, a thin wail swallowed by the storm's roar. Her blood ran cold. No settler for miles would have a child out in this. "Stay, Rusty," she commanded, her voice tight. She grabbed her heavy shawl and a lantern. Opening the door was like opening a gate to hell. The wind and rain threw her back a step. Shielding the lantern's flame with her body, Sarah stepped out into the mud in fury. "Hello!" she screamed into the wind. "Is someone there?" The crying led her toward the edge of her property, to the ancient oak tree that had seen 100 years of storms. The mud sucked at her boots, trying to pull her down. The lantern light flickered, and then it found them. 3 small shapes, huddled at the base of the massive trunk. Soaked, shivering, and staring at her with eyes wide with terror. They were Native American children, Sioux by their clothes. 2 boys and a little girl. The oldest boy, maybe 10 years old, had his arms wrapped around the other 2, trying to shield them from a storm that could kill a grown man. Sarah's heart stopped. She knew the tension in these parts, knew what some folks would do if they found Sioux children on their land. But all she saw were 3 little ones on the verge of freezing to death. They didn't understand her words, so she used her hands, pointing to the warm, glowing light of her cabin. Shelter. Safety. The oldest boy hesitated for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, looking for the trap. Then, he gave a small, stiff nod. Inside, the warmth of the fire was a shock. Sarah stripped off their wet clothes and wrapped them in every blanket she owned. They huddled together by the hearth, watching her every move like frightened deer. She heated soup, her hands shaking slightly. The youngest, a little girl no older than 5, was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Sarah knelt beside her and gently wrapped another blanket around her shoulders. The girl's dark eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, the fear was replaced by a flicker of gratitude. "I'm Sarah," she said softly, pointing to herself. The oldest boy seemed to understand. He pointed to himself. "Chayton." He pointed to the younger boy. "Hansa." And then to the little girl. "Winona." As they ate the hot soup, their fear slowly melted away, replaced by a cautious trust. But Sarah's mind was racing. Where were their parents? A hunting party, maybe, caught in the flash storm? They must be mad with worry. But then she noticed something strange. The children weren't just cold and scared. They were exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from running for a long, long time. And there were scratches on their arms and faces, not from the storm, but from pushing through dense brush. They weren't just lost. They were running from something. As the children finally drifted off to sleep in a warm pile of blankets by the fire, Sarah sat in a rocking chair, rifle across her lap. The storm raged outside, but a different kind of storm was brewing inside her. She didn't know what she had brought into her home. She just knew that for tonight, they were safe, and that would have to be enough. The dawn came quiet and still. The world outside was washed clean, but broken. Mud and debris were everywhere. Sarah stepped out into the cool morning air, her rifle still in hand, and saw them immediately. 2 riders, coming from the east, moving slowly, carefully through the muck. They were Sioux warriors. Her hand tightened on the rifle. Strangers were always a risk, but this was different. This felt dangerous. The lead rider was imposing, his face a mask of grim purpose. He raised a hand in the sign of peace. Sarah returned it, but didn't lower her weapon. "I am Looking Bear," the man said in broken English. "We search for 3 children." A wave of relief washed over Sarah. "They are here," she said, her voice hoarse. "They're safe. I found them in the storm." Looking Bear's face softened with relief, but his companions did not. The second warrior's eyes were hard, scanning every inch of her homestead, his gaze lingering on her rifle. He looked at her not with gratitude, but with deep suspicion. That's when Sarah realized this wasn't just a search party. This was a recovery, and they weren't sure if she was a savior or a kidnapper. "The children belong to our tribe," Looking Bear continued, his voice heavy. "The youngest. She is the daughter of our chief, White Eagle." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The chief's daughter, little Winona, the shivering child she had held just hours before. The stakes of the previous night suddenly became terrifyingly clear. If she hadn't opened her door, or if the storm had taken them, it wouldn't have just been a tragedy. It would have been an act of war. Leading them inside, she watched as Looking Bear gently woke the children. Their faces exploded with relief, and a torrent of Lakota filled the small cabin. Chayton spoke for a long time, pointing at the fire, the blankets, and at Sarah. Looking Bear turned to her, and the respect in his eyes was now deep and genuine. "He says you gave them shelter from the storm, food, warmth. He says you sang to Winona when the thunder frightened her." Sarah just nodded, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Looking Bear said, and his voice was firm as stone. "Not anyone." His eyes flickered toward his suspicious companion. "Many white settlers would have turned them away, or worse." He was right. The battle at Little Bighorn was only 2 years past. The air between their peoples was thick with blood and mistrust. "They were children," Sarah said simply. "That's all I saw." As the children prepared to leave, Looking Bear explained that their chief, White Eagle, had been leading the search himself all night, frantic with worry. "He will want to thank you," Looking Bear said. "It is our way. A debt has been made." "That's not necessary," Sarah insisted. But Looking Bear wouldn't hear it. "White Eagle is a man of honor. He will come." Just before they left, little Winona broke free and ran to Sarah, wrapping her tiny arms around her waist. Sarah knelt and hugged her back, a lump forming in her throat. She watched them ride away until they were just specks on the horizon. The cabin had never felt so empty. A week went by. The homestead was quiet again. Sarah had nearly convinced herself that Looking Bear's words were just a polite gesture. Life fell back into its rhythm of chores and solitude. Then, one morning, Rusty started barking. A group of riders was on the ridge. Not 2 this time, but 6 or 7. All Sioux. They moved with a purpose that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. At the front, on a magnificent spotted horse, rode a man with an undeniable air of command. This was White Eagle. She stood her ground as they approached, her hand resting on Rusty's head. The chief dismounted. He was older than she'd expected, his face lined with the wisdom of a man who had carried the weight of his people for a long time. A necklace of bear claws rested on his chest. "Sarah Bennett," he said. His English was clear, his voice deep. "I am White Eagle. You saved my daughter." He studied her, his gaze so intense it felt like he was looking straight into her soul. "Looking Bear told me of your kindness," he said. "In a time of great distrust, you opened your home to our children. This is a rare wisdom." He gestured, and one of his men brought forward a beautifully decorated rawhide container. Inside were beaded moccasins, dried meats, and berries, and a small medicine pouch. "Gifts." "Thank you," Sarah said, genuinely touched. "This is not enough," White Eagle said. "My people owe you a debt. From this day, you are under the protection of the Hunkpapa Sioux. No harm will come to you from our people." He paused, and his next words were heavy. "And if others threaten you, send word. We will come. Sarah was stunned. This was more than a thank you. This was a formal declaration, an alliance. Then, a woman dismounted and approached. It was Yellowbird, White Eagle's wife and Winona's mother. She took Sarah's hands. My heart was broken, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You made it whole. We are sisters now. She pressed a small pendant, carved from shimmering shell, into Sarah's palm. This belonged to my grandmother. It carries the wisdom of our ancestors. It will protect you. Sarah felt overwhelmed. She was just a simple widow. But in their eyes, she was something more. They shared a meal, roasting venison over her fire. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt like she was part of a community. But as the day drew to a close, the mood shifted. White Eagle pulled her aside, his face grim. My scouts have seen men in this area, he said, his voice low. 3 of them. They ask about isolated homesteads. They have hard eyes and new guns. A chill went down Sarah's spine. Outlaws? Worse, White Eagle said. They move north from Nebraska, leaving bodies behind them. They take what they want, and they are moving this way. The warning hung in the air, a dark cloud over the warmth of the day. As he prepared to leave, White Eagle gave her a final, chilling instruction. If trouble comes, he said, pointing to the ridge behind her cabin, light 3 fires, in a row. My warriors are always watching. They will see the smoke. They will come. He wasn't just offering help. He was telling her that trouble was not a possibility. It was an inevitability. As she watched them ride off, the precious pendant clutched in her hand, Sarah realized the chief's visit wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. She had saved his children from a storm, but White Eagle had just warned her about a hurricane, and it was heading straight for her. 3 days. For 3 days, a knot of dread sat in Sarah's stomach. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Rusty, her old hound, was just as tense, pacing the cabin floor, a low growl constantly rumbling in his chest. On the 3rd morning, she woke before dawn. The air was thick, heavy with a silence that felt wrong. She peered out the window. Nothing but moonlight and shadows. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Something's out there, isn't it, boy? She whispered to Rusty. She slipped on her boots, grabbing the rifle by the door. She had to check the livestock. Stepping outside, the crisp air did nothing to calm her nerves. As she rounded the corner of the cabin, Rusty froze. His growl became a snarl. Then she heard it, the soft nicker of her mare, Penny, and a man's voice, low and unfamiliar, trying to soothe her. Someone was in her barn. Her blood turned to ice. White Eagle's warning screamed in her mind. 3 men. Hard eyes. She started to back away, trying to melt back into the shadows of the cabin. She had to get inside, bar the door, wait for daylight. She never made it. A hand, rough as bark, clamped over her mouth. An arm like a steel band wrapped around her chest, crushing the air from her lungs. The rifle was ripped from her grasp. Well now, a gravelly voice whispered in her ear. Look what we flushed out, boys. 2 more figures emerged from the darkness. They were exactly as White Eagle had described. Their faces were cruel masks in the moonlight. One of them, the leader, had a jagged scar that pulled his lip into a permanent sneer. Get the horses, the scarred man ordered one of them, and anything else of value. He turned his full attention to Sarah, his eyes crawling over her. Looks like you got a nice little setup here. Bet you got some savings tucked away. Rusty lunged, a blur of teeth and fury. But the 3rd man was ready. His boot connected with the dog's side with a sickening thud. Rusty yelped and flew through the air, landing in a heap. Rusty! Sarah screamed, the hand over her mouth slipping for a second. She fought, kicking and twisting, but the man holding her was a wall of muscle. Feisty, he chuckled. I like that. The leader stepped close, his breath smelling of stale whiskey. Listen, ma'am. We're gonna take what we want. You can make this easy, or you can make it real. Real hard. His eyes darkened. We've already visited a few of your neighbors. They weren't very cooperative. The unspoken threat hung in the air. These weren't just thieves, they were killers. They dragged her inside the cabin. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror, but one thought burned through the panic: the signal. The 3 fires on the ridge. It was her only chance. A sliver of hope in a world of pain. "My lockbox," she blurted out, thinking fast. "It's in the root cellar. Under the floorboards. My husband's gold watch is in there." The leader grunted, nodding to the man who had kicked her dog. "Go find it, Wade." As Wade disappeared into the back room, Sarah saw the first, faint hint of gray on the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming. If she could just buy a little more time. A sharp bark from outside made the leader curse. Rusty was back. He moved to the window, distracted for a single crucial second. It was now or never. Sarah grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the hearth. With a scream born of rage and desperation, she swung it with every ounce of strength she had. It connected with the side of the leader's head with a sickening crack. He dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. She didn't wait to see if he was dead. She bolted for the door, screaming Rusty's name as she ran for the ridge behind the cabin. "She's getting away!" The man from the barn, Jeb, saw her and shouted the alarm. She could hear them crashing through the brush behind her, their curses fouling the morning air. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead. But she kept climbing, scrambling up the steep slope toward the 3 small piles of wood she had prepared. She reached the top, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the matches from her apron pocket. The first fire caught just as Wade, the man she'd sent on a wild goose chase, reached the bottom of the ridge. The dry kindling roared to life. "What in God's name is she doing?" he yelled up at Jeb. The second fire caught, then the third. 3 pillars of smoke and flame, rising into the pre-dawn sky. An urgent, desperate message. A prayer sent into the wilderness. Jeb reached her then, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her to the ground. "Whatever you're calling for," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "It ain't gonna get here in time to save you." He started dragging her back down the hill, but then a new sound cut through the air. A sound that made the blood freeze in the outlaw's veins. The thunder of hooves, dozens of them. From the east, a line of riders appeared, cresting the hill like a wave of vengeance. Sioux warriors, their faces painted for war, their cries splitting the dawn. And at their head, on his spotted stallion, was White Eagle. The outlaws panicked. Wade fired a single, wild shot before trying to run. Jeb dropped Sarah and scrambled for the horses. They stood no chance. The warriors moved with terrifying speed and precision, surrounding the homestead, cutting off any hope of escape. In minutes, it was over. The 3 outlaws were disarmed, bound, and kneeling in the dirt. Sarah, trembling and bruised, slowly walked down the hill. White Eagle dismounted, his face a storm of fury and concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, unable to speak. "You came so fast." "My son, Chayton, was on patrol," White Eagle said, gesturing to the boy who sat proudly on his pony nearby. The same boy she had saved from the storm. "He saw your fires." But there was something else in White Eagle's eyes, something he wasn't saying. The patrol wasn't just a coincidence. They hadn't just been nearby. They had been waiting. They knew. As the warriors tied the prisoners, one of them, the scarred leader, spat on the ground at White Eagle's feet. "You think you've won, Chief? Your new pet here just signed her own death warrant." He grinned a bloody smile at Sarah. "Our boss ain't gonna be happy about this. He paid us good money to clear this land, starting with any settler who gets too friendly with your kind." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a random robbery. It was a targeted attack, a message. Someone had hired these men to drive a wedge of terror between the settlers and the Sioux. Someone who wanted this land, and was willing to soak it in blood to get it. White Eagle looked at Sarah, his expression grim. "These men will be taken to the fort. They are wanted for murders all the way to Nebraska. But their leader speaks the truth. You are not safe here anymore. His boss will send others." "Where can I go?" Sarah whispered, looking at the home she had fought so hard to keep. Yellowbird stepped forward, her face full of compassion. "Come with us. Live with our people. Winona asks for you every day. You are one of us now." The invitation was more than an offer of shelter. It was an acceptance into their world, their family. She was no longer just Sarah Bennett, the lonely widow. She was Sarah Bennett, sister to Yellowbird, protector of Winona, an ally of the Hunkpapa Sioux. The pendant around her neck felt warm against her skin. "My people have a belief," White Eagle said, his voice resonating with ancient power. "When you save a life, you become responsible for it. You saved my daughter. Now, we save you." As she rode away from her homestead, flanked by warriors, she looked back at the 3 smoking pyres on the ridge. They hadn't just saved her life. They had burned her old life to the ground, and from the ashes, something new and dangerous and beautiful was beginning to rise. She was riding not just toward a Sioux encampment, but into the heart of a war she didn't know she was a part of. The journey to the Sioux village was a blur. Sarah rode in a daze, the adrenaline of the attack giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. But as they crested the final hill and she saw the camp spread out below, a sea of teepees glowing in the late morning sun, she felt not fear, but a strange sense of coming home. Winona saw her first, letting out a shriek of pure joy and running to meet them, her little legs pumping. She threw herself into Sarah's arms, and for the first time since the attack, Sarah let the tears come, holding the child who had unwittingly changed the course of her entire life. Life in the village was a world away from her solitary homestead. She was given her own lodge next to White Eagle and Yellowbird's. The women of the tribe taught her their ways, how to scrape hides, bead intricate patterns, and find medicine in the plants of the prairie. She learned their language, her tongue slowly shaping the unfamiliar sounds until she could share stories and laughter around the communal fire. She became a second mother to Winona, and in the girl's boundless affection, Sarah found a healing she never knew she needed. The empty spaces in her heart, carved out by the loss of her husband and the years of loneliness, began to fill. But beneath the surface of this newfound peace, the current of war ran deep. Warriors came and went, their faces grim. Scouts brought back reports of burned-out homesteads and escalating tensions with the soldiers at the fort. The name of a man named Silas Croft, a wealthy land speculator from the east, was whispered with a mixture of fear and hatred. He was the one buying up land, pushing the boundaries, and hiring men like the ones who had attacked her. He was the boss. One evening, White Eagle sat with her by the fire. "The men who attacked you," he said. "They confessed before the army hanged them. They confirmed they were hired by Croft. His plan is to create chaos, to make it seem like our people are attacking settlers, so the army will drive us out. Then he can claim the land for himself." "But they'll know he's lying," Sarah said. "You took the men to the fort. You helped me." White Eagle shook his head, his eyes full of a weary sadness. "To the soldiers, we are all just savages. My word against a rich white man's, it means nothing. They see our warriors riding the plains, and they see a threat. Croft uses their fear against us. He uses your story, the story of a white woman living among us, as proof that we are corrupting the settlers, turning them against their own." It was a devastating twist. Her very existence in the camp, the symbol of hope she thought she represented, was being used as a weapon against the people who had saved her. She was no longer just a target. She was a liability. The sanctuary they had given her was putting them all in greater danger. She knew what she had to do. "I have to go back," she told him, her voice firm. "I can't let him use me to hurt you." "To go back is to die," White Eagle said flatly. "Croft will not let you live to tell the truth." "Then I can't stay here and be the reason your people suffer," she countered, her heart aching. "There has to be another way." For days a heavy gloom hung over the camp. Sarah felt trapped, a pawn in a game she couldn't win. But then an idea began to form. A desperate, dangerous gamble born from the stories the women told around the fire. Stories of the old ways, of seeking wisdom from the spirits of the land. She went to Yellowbird. "You told me the pendant your mother gave you carries the wisdom of your ancestors. Is there a way to seek that wisdom? A way to find an answer that the warrior's spears and the white man's laws can't provide?" Yellowbird looked at her, a strange light in her eyes. She led Sarah to the tribe's elderly medicine woman, a woman named Stone Dreamer, whose face was a map of 100 winters. Sarah told her everything. When she was finished, the old woman was silent for a long time. "The spirits of this land are angry," Stone Dreamer finally rasped, her voice like stones grinding together. "The iron road scars the earth. The buffalo are vanishing. The sacred places are defiled. Croft is not just a greedy man. He is a sickness. And a sickness must be cleansed not with weapons, but with a powerful truth." Stone Dreamer revealed a hidden prophecy, a story passed down through generations. It spoke of a time when the earth would cry out, and a ghost-hearted sister, one who was not of the people but carried their heart, would unite the spirits of the displaced in the anger of the land to reveal a great crime hidden beneath the soil. "Croft's evil is buried," Stone Dreamer said, her eyes boring into Sarah. "He has desecrated sacred ground. Find the proof of his crime, and you will not need an army. The land itself will be your witness, and the white man's own laws will be his undoing." Suddenly, Sarah understood. She remembered the outlaw's words. Clear this land. It wasn't just about homesteads. Croft was after something specific. And White Eagle's scouts had reported his men were always seen near a place the Sioux called the Valley of Whispering Bones. A place they avoided, believing it to be haunted. A place where, generations ago, a different tribe, a peaceful farming tribe, had been mysteriously wiped out. This was the gamble. Not to fight Croft's men, but to uncover his secret. Sarah, with her white skin, could potentially travel where the Sioux could not without raising alarm. She was the ghost-hearted sister from the prophecy. She, along with Chayton and a few other trusted warriors, left the camp under the cover of darkness. They weren't riding to war. They were riding to dig up a secret buried for decades. They were going to the Valley of Whispering Bones to find the truth that could save them all, or get them all killed. The Valley of Whispering Bones was aptly named. A constant low wind moaned through the rock formations, creating an eerie chorus. The ground was barren, littered with the sun-bleached bones of animals. No birds sang here. It felt like a place where life itself had given up. For 2 days, they searched, digging in the places the old stories hinted at. They found nothing but rock and sterile soil. Chayton grew restless, the warriors uneasy. This felt like a fool's errand. Maybe the prophecy was just an old woman's tale. But Sarah refused to give up. She remembered something else Stone Dreamer had said. The crime is hidden where the water weeps for the dead. She scanned the valley, looking for any sign of water. In a hidden canyon, tucked away behind a rock slide, she found it. A small hidden spring, weeping from a crack in the rock face, feeding a patch of unnaturally green grass. They started to dig. Hours turned the soil. Then, a shovel struck something hard. Not rock, metal. They unearthed a rotting metal lockbox. Prying it open, their lantern light fell upon a stack of yellowed papers and a leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to a government surveyor from 30 years prior. Its pages told a horrifying story. He wrote of a peaceful farming tribe, the Mandan, who lived in this valley. He wrote of their kindness. And then he wrote of the discovery he made. The valley was filled with silver, rich veins of it running just beneath the soil. He had made the mistake of sharing his discovery with his guide, a young, ambitious fur trader, a man named Silas Croft. The final entries were frantic, terrified. Croft had returned not with mining equipment, but with a band of mercenaries. He'd poisoned the tribe's water source with mercury from his prospecting kit. He had murdered them all, men, women, and children, to claim the silver for himself, burying their bodies in a mass grave and reporting they had died of a plague. The surveyor, racked with guilt and fearing for his life, had buried the proof before fleeing. He'd never been heard from again. This was it. The great crime. Croft didn't just want the land for cattle. He was sitting on a silver mine he'd claimed through mass murder. He was trying to start a war with the Sioux to create a military buffer zone so no one could get close enough to ever discover his secret. But as they stared at the journal, a new sound echoed through the valley. Not the wind, the clatter of shod horses on rock. They had been followed. A dozen of Croft's men, rifles drawn, were silhouetted on the canyon rim above them. and at their lead was Croft himself, an older, crueler version of the man from the surveyor's journal. "I knew someone would come sniffing around here eventually," Croft called down, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I have to thank you. I've been looking for that box for 30 years. They were trapped, utterly and completely. Chayton and the warriors drew their weapons, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and exposed. Justice was in their hands, but death was standing right in front of them. Give me the box, and I'll let the woman live," Croft offered, a sick smile on his face. "The rest of you, you're trespassing." Sarah looked at Chayton, at the proof in her hands, and at the impossible odds. The prophecy had led them to the truth, but it hadn't promised they would live to tell it. Just as Croft's men started to take aim, a single piercing cry echoed from the opposite rim of the canyon. A war cry. White Eagle. He had never intended to let them go alone. He and his warriors had been shadowing them the entire time. A silent, invisible guard. Now, the hunters had become the hunted. Warriors seemed to rise from the very rocks, surrounding Croft's men. The battle was short and brutal. Trapped between two forces, Croft's mercenaries fell quickly. In the end, only Croft himself was left, disarmed and dragged before White Eagle. "This is Sioux land," White Eagle said, his voice cold as the grave. "You have poisoned it with your greed and your ghosts." They took Croft and the surveyor's journal not to the fort, but to the territorial capital in Yankton. In front of the governor, with the undeniable proof from the lockbox, the story was laid bare. The tale of a frontier widow, a Sioux chief, and a 30-year-old crime shocked the territory. Croft's empire crumbled, his lands were seized, his name disgraced. Justice, swift and absolute, had finally come. When spring returned to the prairie, Sarah went back to her homestead. But she wasn't alone. Chayton and his family built their lodge on the hill overlooking her cabin. Then another family came, and another. White settlers, hearing the true story, came too. Not with suspicion, but with respect. A new community was born, a place where two worlds met, not in conflict, but in shared understanding. White Eagle and Yellowbird were frequent visitors, and Winona spent as much time in Sarah's cabin as she did in her parents' lodge. One evening, Sarah stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. Winona was teaching a settler's child a Lakota string game, their laughter mixing on the breeze. White Eagle stood beside her. "The prophecy came true," she said softly. "Prophecies do not make heroes, Sarah Bennett," he replied, his gaze on the children. "They only point the way. You had the courage to walk the path." A single act of kindness on a stormy night hadn't just saved 3 children. It had uncovered a buried history, prevented a war, and built a bridge not of wood or stone, but of courage and heart. The future was still uncertain, but here, in this small patch of Dakota land, they had planted the seeds of a new beginning, together. If you enjoyed this story of how a single act of courage can change the world, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what you think the future held for this unique community. Thanks for watching.